Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Listen, we are in dire need of donations to keep these shows running and available for you 24/7. So that means when you're in the car, it's available for you to listen to. Whether you're at work, streaming, playing a game, it's available for you to listen to. Rowing your deed and learning about the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful different topics of Islam. Listen, one of the heaviest deeds that could be placed on your scale on the day of judgment is Sadaqah Jariyah. Yes, I know I'm trying to build deeds daily. So you can too. So listen, feel free and please, from the bottom of your heart, donate to this wonderful cause, wonderful website and platform to continually push out shows that will benefit you and the Muslim Ummah. Yes, you can donate by going to the SunnahFollowers.net website, pressing the donate tab. You can also scan the QR code in YouTube on the far left top of our videos that are streaming. Listen, guys, this is very important, and take this as important. We want to keep this programming available for you 24/7 so that you have access in your car, anywhere you choose to tune in to this wonderful programming. Yes, guys, it's all at your disposal. So listen, feel free to donate. Once again, remember, Sadaqah Jariyah, one of the heaviest deeds on your scale on the day of judgment. He was known as the Sword of Allah, one of the greatest generals in history, one of Islam's greatest heroes. His name, Khalid ibn al-Walid. Sunnah Followers presents a new series presented by Ustad Mukhtar Shahid. Coming soon, so stay tuned. Streaming on all major platforms. Channel Sunnah Followers.
Ina alhamdulillah wa salat wa salam ala wa rasulullah. Let me make a couple of corrections. This is supposed to be our Aqidah class, but I don't know what happened. I did the PowerPoint, but I think I deleted it by mistake. And I don't know how I did that, but I deleted the PowerPoint. So this is the other day I was supposed to do the Quranic Tafsir class, but I was unable to do it because something had come up. But I still have the PowerPoint because I was going to hold that class for this week. So instead of doing the class on Know Your Lord, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and focus in on this class for today, because I don't know. I don't know how I deleted that PowerPoint, but I did. So with that said, and also just to let everybody know, we also have the lecture with Brother Mukhtar at 7:30 after this class. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the Quranic Tafsir, and it goes hand in hand with what we've been discussing anyway about the Lordship of Allah, because as we've talked about even with the kids class today, one of the reasons why Allah has sent his punishment, and that's what it is. I'm sorry, the truth hurts. I'm not going to sugarcoat this deen to appease people, because I could care less about people, because if you please the people, they'll never like you. They'll never be satisfied with you, and you will get no benefit from them. It's all about pleasing Allah. Allah says he sends war as a punishment, and it's a punishment. And the Muslims today are deserving of it. I'm not saying that the people in Gaza are deserving. I'm talking about the Muslims in general are deserving of this war, because we have deviated away from believing in Islam and having the correct understanding of it that those original companions had. And as our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in that hadith that we went over this morning with the kids, whenever you live to see controversy in this religion, The day that you live to see the people abandon my sunnah, his sunnah, the day in which the people abandon the correct understanding of this religion that those companions had, then know that Allah will send war. Allah will send calamity after calamity after calamity, to punish us as a result. So I'm sorry. The reality is we brought it on ourselves. You can, if it makes you Muslims who are weak in your faith, if it makes you Muslims who are weak in your understanding, if it makes you Muslims who are weak in your practice of this religion feel good about yourselves to blame it all on Zionists, that's your business. But the reality is Allah. This is one of his actions of lordship. As Allah says, anything good and anything bad that happens comes from him as a result of what we've brought upon ourselves. And that's a harsh reality for weak-minded people to accept, but that's the reality nonetheless. So for this class, the Hasidic Tafsir, we talked about how everything begins with and ends with our belief in Allah and his divinity and his lordship. Okay. A lot of Muslims read the Quran and they say they walk away with no benefit from it. And they ask, why is it? Well, first of all, when you read the Quran, you're not supposed to just read the words. Allah says, don't just recite his words, but also ponder the meaning of what he is saying. Because the Quran is not the creation of Allah. It's the words of Allah. And I don't care how many times you read the same sentence over and over again. Each time you read it, you're going to come out with a different meaning, a new understanding of that verse, because the Quran applies to us and for all times. Okay. And we all are going through different trials. We're all going through different hardships. We're all different in our levels of faith and understanding and practice. So those words will impact us in different ways. And the Quran carries many miracles. It's a miracle within itself because it's the speech of Allah. And Allah has 1/3 of the Quran as reminders and examples to us. He talks about the history of what happened to the people who came before us, those who disobeyed him, those who accepted his actions of lordship, those people who came before us who believed in his divinity and who believed in all his names and who believed in all his attributes without asking why or how. Allah tells us what happened to them. And he also tells us what happened to those who questioned his names, who questioned his attributes, who questioned his actions of lordship. That's 1/3 of the Quran. Those stories and parables that Allah gives us. Okay, so let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen. And again, this is the class that I was supposed to have taught last week, but something happened and I couldn't hold my class. And since I don't know how I deleted my PowerPoint for today's class on Know Your Lord, I'm just going to do this because this is the PowerPoint I had that I would have had to redo that PowerPoint and it wasn't no time. Okay, so today we're going to be covering pages 118 through 125 of the book, the Hasidic Tafsir. And for the new people who are tuning in to me, if you don't have this book is written by another book written by Sheikh Kareem Abu Zaid. Most all the books that I'm using here are all from Kareem Abu Zaid, and you can purchase them all on Amazon. So go to Amazon.com. You want to get this book, the Hasidic Tafsir, Volume 1. And if you don't have Know Your Lord, buy that one too. And also get the children's version of Know Your Lord too. It's called Knowing Your Lord and Sharing Islam. Okay, and the books are well worth the price. And today we're going to speak about the higher aims of the Quran. And what is the higher aim? How to reach the highest understanding, the greatest understanding and implementation of the Quran. Because when we read each word, we're supposed to take the meaning of what Allah is saying and apply it to ourselves. So we're going to focus in on the chapters and the chapters, verses, and the stories that Allah tells us in those chapters, and how we can ponder them and apply them to our lives to walk away closer to Allah with a greater understanding of our purpose. Okay? So, Allah, like I tell you guys, for those of you Muslims living on the East Coast, because I'm going to point it out, we got Muslims in here where I live, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in New York. I'm talking about the Northeast Coast. Just because people claim to be Salafi, don't make them Salafi. We talked about that. Salafi is not a noun anyway. It's an action, an attribute, so to say. Just because people claim to be people of the Sunnah, people who follow what the companions were upon, doesn't mean it's true. Because there's a lot of Muslims on the Northeast coast of America who believe that the Quran is a creation of Allah. Like I told you, most Muslims in America are Jamia or they're Murziat. Okay, most Muslims in America are Jamia or Murziat. It's not that many people who are upon the understanding of the companions. I would say there's only a handful. I would say of all the Muslims in America, there's probably just a handful who are upon the understanding of those original companions. Most are Jamia or Murjiat. Okay? Well, for those who belong to these other understandings, they believe that the Quran is the creation of Allah. It's not. It's the speech of Allah. These are his words. He spoke. He spoke. He spoke these words to the angel Jibril, who in turn, shared them with our prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who upon receiving the words of Allah, he called for his scribes. And he had 4 scribes who wrote down what Allah had to say. And Allah divided his speech into 114 chapters. And there is a border between each of them. So thus, each chapter of that Quran has its own message to convey. And this is because whenever there is a deliberate representation, then it conveys an idea. So each chapter of the Quran has an idea or a message it's conveying. The Fatiha, the Ikhlas. What's the message behind the Ikhlas? The message behind the Ikhlas is to know that Allah is one, that he has no partners. What's the message behind the Fatiha? The same thing, Allah's names, his attributes, who he is, how he's omnipotent. So each chapter has its own message to convey. And the message that it has to convey is what we would call the topic of that chapter. And as Muslims, we have to aspire to grasp the understanding of that message and then apply it. That's how we achieve the aim, the higher aim of each chapter. If you understand the message behind the chapter Al-Fatiha and you apply it to yourself, you've reached the aim of that chapter. If you understand the meaning behind the surah of sincerity and apply it, then you've reached the aim. And Allah tells us that He is the best of planners. Now, we went over this verse yesterday in our Aqidah class. I want to focus you in on this again. When Allah says that He is the best of planners, that's an attribute. What's one of Allah's attributes? One of Allah's attributes is that He plans better than any of us. But can we call Him the one who plans? No, that's not a name. This is an attribute. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, and I'm going to give you a quiz on that tomorrow. You know, we have to refer to Allah by the names He's given us. We cannot take an attribute of His like this and make it a name unless He's given that name to Himself. So Allah is the best of planners. And for the person, the interpreter of the Quran, who is trying to reach the highest understanding of this verse, he can deduce that each chapter, that one of the aims of a chapter is to grasp what the message is, the real message, the true message that Allah is trying to convey. And how does He come up with that message? By using what we talked about before, the science of connectivity. He has to be able to connect that chapter with the chapter before it and the chapter that comes after it. And for this, the scholar of the Quran to come up with the highest aim or meaning of a chapter, he looks at the chapter before it, and he looks at the meaning, the aim of the chapter after it, and from there, he comes up with the meaning. So the sequence of several chapters in the arrangement can give you a suggestion as to what the theme of each chapter is, and how each chapter may have different meanings, but they are all focusing on the same thing. For example, like what Dr. Jamali has done. When Dr. Jamali taught you sisters the rights, what are the rights of women and children? He started off with Surah Nisa, and then he went to Surah Nur, and then he went to Surah Tahrim. The connectivity, he used the science of connectivity, because even though each one of those chapters has a different meaning, they all share the same theme or the same topic of rights of women. So this is what the scholar of Quran would do. You know, in order to tell you the meaning behind a chapter, he looks at the surah that, or the chapter that came before it and after it, and uses the science of connectivity, because the connectivity of each chapter influences the understanding of it. Okay? But we don't use it as a means to bring conclusions. And this is what we're going to speak about a little bit more, because many conditions have to apply before an aim can be considered by a Quranic interpreter as valid. For example, the higher aim must be comprehensive. It must be applicable to everything that's in that chapter, not just one sentence. So for a Quran interpreter to give you the meaning of a chapter, for example, the meaning of the chapter of the light, or El Nur, the interpreter has to look at the entire content. He has to look at everything, all the sentences and the meaning of that chapter, not just one or two. Okay? And also, the meaning must be identified The meaning of that chapter must be identified through a knowledge-based process, not through a dream, or you claim that Allah sent you the message. And this is important because a lot of you, when you're learning the Quran or learning this religion from Sufis, you know, Sufis deal with dreams a lot. They'll tell you, oh, I know the meaning of this surah. I had a dream. It was revealed to me in a dream that when Allah said this or Allah said that, what he really meant was this. No, we don't use that. You know, no, the meaning of each surah of the Quran or each chapter of the Quran must be identified through knowledge-based processes, not through dreams, because Allah doesn't send revelations anymore. There are no prophets after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our Prophet Muhammad told us that our dreams can either come from Allah or they can come from Shaitan or from yourself. So how do you know that that dream you had was from Allah or from Shaitan yourself? You ain't no prophet, so there's no way that you can say that you definitely know. So no, it has to be knowledge-based, not dreams. And also, whoever the Quranic interpreter is, he must be able to point out. He has to be able to point out the purpose behind the words in that surah or that chapter. He has to be able to point out the parables that Allah is using in that chapter. He has to be able to point out what is an admonition, that here, that this part, this sentence is an admonition from Allah, or this sentence is advice from Allah. And without this, then that person will not be able to give you the true, correct meaning or understanding, you know, of that surah. So as you guys can see, not everybody is qualified to sit there and tell you what the Quran means. And that's why I'm always cautioning you, sisters. I know a lot of the mosques like to have Quran study groups, but there's a lot of dangers in that, because you're just regular people reading the Quran and you're reading it in English. So you have no idea of the true linguistics of what you're reading. You don't know the history of the religion. You don't know the hadiths. You don't know what happened to cause Allah to say what he's saying. You don't know what if that verse you're reading connects to a verse, a sentence in another chapter. So a lot of you are reading the Quran in these sisterhood groups, and you're giving your opinion on what you think Allah is saying, and it could be wrong. And that's why I tell you, sisters, that's a danger in that. I would suggest you sisters find something else rather than Quran study classes. Maybe y'all can get a book, you know, like the stories of the prophets or something, and read it together. But the Quran, no, I wouldn't play with the Quran that way. Okay? The higher aim of the Quran interpreter, when he's interpreting a chapter, it must be from a subcategory in the list of the holistic Quran, the Quranic aims. And again, you guys don't know what I'm talking about. You ain't qualified for that. And this is why I have a lot of sisters calling me on the phone each day or texting me about their Quran sister classes that they have and how they read this verse here. Does this verse mean blah, blah, blah? No. Well, it doesn't. It says it, no, but do you know what it's talking about? What happened to cause Allah to say that? What's the explanation of this verse from the hadith? Because the hadiths explain the Quran, you know. And does this sentence connect to a theme in another chapter? So we have to be careful with this. And again, guys, for the person that is the scholar of the Quran, and he's trying to give you the understanding, the correct understanding of a surah, his understanding cannot be amongst those understandings that previous well-known scholars have rejected. Okay? We do have well-known scholars of the Quran and the Hadith too. If his understanding is something that has been condemned or rejected or considered innovation by others, then that's a problem as well. Okay? The interpreter must not indulge. And I'm going to tell you, the people that fall into this, many of them are Sufis. And America is filled with a lot of Jamia, Murjia Sufis. Okay? The interpreter must not indulge in the unseen areas in which only Allah has knowledge of. And this is a big problem I see. A lot of you sisters that have y'all Quran study circles that text me about something, you have, well, we were told by the Imam said that this is something, it means this. No, this is one of the things that only Allah knows. Your Imam cannot indulge into the unseen areas which only Allah has full knowledge of. For example, the soul. One of the questions I get a lot from sisters in their sister study, Quran studies, is about the soul. Is it true, Sister Layla, that when a person dies, they walk the earth for 3 days? Oh God, I've had this question so many times. That when you die, you're allowed to walk around the earth for 3 days, talking to your loved one. No. When it comes to the soul, all we can say is what Allah has told us of it. Anybody that's adding more into what the soul does, and they don't have the clear nas or the clear words or verses of the Quran to support it, or from our prophet, the hadith, to support it, we don't accept that. Okay, so if you're delving into the areas of the unseen, like the soul walking the earth and all that nonsense, no, the interpreter can't do that. Also, the higher aim must not identify the essence of the names and attributes of Allah in his true nature and reality. And again, this is another problem with the Sufis. They're always trying to liken Allah. This is another problem. Liken Allah to his creation. Okay? They try to say that Allah's hands are like our hands. I'll give you an example. When Allah says in the Quran he has 2 hands, they will try to liken his hands to our hands. Okay? But we can't do that. Or they'll say that Allah created us in his image. There is a hadith. Allah, the prophet, did say that Allah created us in his image, but it does not mean the way you interpret it. When the prophet said Allah created us in his image, as Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, said, that does not mean that Allah created us like him, to look like him. That means that Allah created us to be the way we are. Allah created us as he imagined us to be. That's what that means. But a lot of you, will listen to your imams, or you have your sisterhood studies, and y'all are reading verses of the Quran, and you don't understand a verse like that. And you say, oh, so Allah's hands are like ours because he created us in his image. No, his hands are nothing like ours. and we look nothing like him. He created us the way he imagined and wanted us to be. That's it. Everybody understands. So, the higher aim cannot identify the essence. If the person's talking about the essence of Allah, the essence of his names, the essence of his attributes, we don't accept that. And also, another problem, people read the verses of the Quran and they try to take the verses and identify when the last hour will come. That's another example. You will read a verse about the fire rising from the fire arising and causing the people to gather at near Mount Arafat. I'm just making an example. And you will say, oh my God, they had a fire in Saudi Arabia. That means it's Judgment Day. That means we're getting ready to be gathered. We're getting ready to be gathered together at Arafat. No, we can't do that. Okay? Because only Allah knows when the last hour will come. So you can't read the verses of the Quran or the surahs of the Quran and try to liken them to what's happening today, to the point whereas if there's a fire that breaks out near Arafat, here we are, it's the last hour. No, we can't do that either. So you guys see that Quran ain't nothing to play with. And also, when the person is given the meaning of a chapter or a meaning of a verse, it can't contradict what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in an authentic hadith, nor should it contradict any other verses or any of the other words that Allah has said in that Quran. Does everyone understand? And this is something that the non-Muslims have always tried to do, and they failed every time because their book doesn't exist on earth anymore. Allah destroyed the original Bible and replaced it with the Quran. Because their book doesn't exist, they play with and they can find a lot of contradictions in their man-made books. They try to do the same with the Quran, but they can't do it. There are no verses that contradict each other, or they'll try to use the hadiths and try to prove that the hadiths and the Quran contradict, and they don't. Okay? So the same thing with the interpreter. If you're going to give me the meaning of a surah or the meaning of a verse of the Quran, your meaning cannot contradict what Allah says or what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said in any form or shape. And also, your meaning should not suggest a political agenda that contradicts Islamic teachings. And that's what's happening today. Like I told you, most Muslims in America are either Murji'a or Jamia. That's Sufism crap, that Mu'tazila crap. We got Muslims right now who call themselves scholars of the religion, who are trying to take they're reading the verses of the Quran and trying to say that means we can participate in voting in Kafir elections in America. That's not true. Allah is clear in numerous verses of the Quran that a non-believer can never be rulers over us, that we can never participate in electing non-believers as to be in charge of us, because their ultimate goal is to cause us to perish. There's numerous verses that say that. Also numerous hadiths from our prophet. But we find a lot of these so-called scholars of the Quran using the words of Allah to suggest a political agenda that contradicts what Allah says, or to try to reform. Remember, we got the famous brothers from out of Texas. They think that they can do reformation of the Quran. They can tweak Allah's laws and tweak Allah's rules, to go with society. because of the LGBTQ movement here in America. We can tweak Allah's laws with man-made legislation instead of us doing wala bara, distancing ourselves from this type of crap. They're telling us to not distance, but instead to just set boundaries. And these are the men in Texas who call themselves scholars. No, you can't do that. But as y'all can see, it's happening. And that's why this war is here. And again, you cannot advance the agenda of the people of innovation either, whether it's in Aqidah issues or any other rituals. These same men from out of Texas is trying to make what is the offer? Let me tell y'all something. Do y'all want to know what the American government offered them in exchange for supporting the Democratic Party and putting the LGBTQ people in office, or Carmela and them? They said, if you do this, we'll make a national holiday. We'll celebrate the Prophet Muhammad's birthday. What a terrible innovation and a shirk. That's shirk too. We don't celebrate birthdays, period. Right before the prophet died, he said, do not do to me what the Christians did to my brother Jesus by celebrating me. Oh, we don't do that. But these Murjiah, Jamia brothers, you know, they're going to take the bullet. Oh, yes, we'll make it a national holiday for the Prophet Muhammad's birthday. This is innovation. You can't do that. But as y'all can see, it's trying to be done here in America as I'm speaking. And that's why Allah sent all this punishment to us. Okay? And also the understanding that the interpreter gives must not be based on opinion, logic, philosophy, sociology, or any of that garbage that's going to contradict what the companions had to say or what their students had to say. So again, that's the science of just reading each chapter. You have to look to see what is the meaning. What is the meaning of that chapter? Because every chapter has a meaning. How do you come to the meaning? You sit there and analyze all the words of each sentence and then come up with what is the theme of that chapter. And then does that theme coincide with the higher aim of the Quran? So that's the sequence that's followed. The meaning of the verse, the theme of the chapter, and does it meet the higher aim of the Quran? So each chapter of the Quran can be divided into sections comprised of sentences, and each set of sentences has a meaning behind it, and that meaning should fall in harmony with whatever the topic or theme is of that chapter. And then whatever the theme of that chapter is should consequently go hand in hand with the ultimate aim of the Quran. So y'all see, this is not only a science, but an art. It's an art and a science to understanding each chapter of that Quran. That's why I tell you, sisters, y'all got to be careful with these Quran study groups. You ain't qualified. A lot of you ain't qualified to have Quran study groups. Unless you are learning from a scholar of the Quran who's qualified, y'all need to replace those study groups with a different type of study group. And again, every chapter of the Quran contains a diversity of issues with overlapping topics. But each chapter has a higher aim. Okay? The Quran gathers the unity of each chapter's theme by linking the similarity to each chapter. So y'all see, this is an art. This is the connectivity. How do the chapters connect? Like Dr. Dramali did in his series on women's rights. He started with Nisa, Nur, Tahrim, and then he went to Baqarah. Baqarah by using the science of connectivity. And by the way, Dr. Jamali has a PhD in the science of the Quran. He's qualified to teach it, just like Sheikh Saud, PhD in the science of the Quran, just like Dr. Sheikh Morsi in the science of the Quran, just like Dr. Asim, the science of the Quran. Are you sisters able to come to the meaning of a chapter by flipping to 10 other chapters like Dr. Jamali did when he went over the rights of women with you, sisters? And also the theme or the subject, the topic of a chapter that helps the interpreter to identify the meanings based on the other similar chapter topics. And those things, remember, they all connect together. That's basically what I'm putting here to try to break it down to you. Okay? And not only do they look at the theme of each chapter, but again, the meaning of the verses too. Each verse or each sentence in a chapter has a meaning. The interpreter needs to understand that every verse has a meaning, and that meaning must relate to whatever the topic is for that chapter. Listen to what Salama. And by the way, just for the record, Salama, she was the wife of the prophet. She was also a scholar of fiqh. She was a scholar of the Quran. And this is some trivia for you guys. Out of all the companions, no one, I repeat, no one could recite the Quran with the exact tajweed of the prophet other than Salama. Oh yes, she could recite the Quran with the exact tajweed of the prophet Muhammad. And men and women would travel as Islam spread throughout the Roman and Persian Empire. Men and women would travel and have her listen to them recite the Quran, just so they can say, do I sound like the prophet? And also Salama's daughter Zainab became a scholar of the Quran as well. She was taught by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and her mother, and also Aisha. Okay? Listen to what Salama said. She said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever he recited a chapter or the Quran, he would pause his recitation between each verse. For example, if he were reciting the Fatiha, he would say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then he would stop and pause for a few seconds. Then he'd say, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. And then he'd stop. And he'd pause for a few seconds. And then he would say, Maliki Yawmiddin. And he'd stop. And the reason why he'd stop after each sentence is because Allah answers you back. And also he would stop but after each sentence to ponder what Allah is saying. How many of us do that when we recite the Fatiha or any verses of the Quran? And he didn't just do it with the Fatiha. This is with any surah. If he was, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ, he paused. Okay? This is any surah. He paused at the end of each sentence. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. He paused. And that's from Salama. And like I said, she was a scholar of fiqh. That's a scholar of understanding. That's what that means in English, of understanding the Quran. Okay. And for the verses in each chapter that do not connect together, listen to what Sheikh El-Fawzan said about this. He said they don't contradict each other, as the innovators say. He says contradiction in the Quran is only in our understanding, but not in its composition. So for those verses that have a meaningful connection, but and then the other verses that we don't know or we think don't connect, we don't sit there and say that that's contradiction in the Quran, because we don't know everything. Does everybody understand that? Because there are some innovators out there that will say, if you're reading, for example, the chapter Fatiha, if there's a verse that comes out of left field that has nothing to do with the theme of the chapter, then that's contradiction. That's not true. Listen to what Allah says, for example, in the interpretation of the meaning Alif Lam Ra. This is a book whose verses are perfected and then presented in detail from one who is wise and acquainted, talking about himself. So for any Muslim to say that when we read the Quran, some of the verses in a chapter don't have the meaning of them, don't connect to each other, this is a person who doesn't know what he's talking about. And this is a grave sin. As Allah says in the interpretation of the meaning, do they not then consider the Quran carefully? Had it been from other than Allah, then they would surely have found there many contradictions. But since the Quran is from Allah, there are no contradictions. And that's what behooves the scientists today, because many scientists have tried to find contradictions within the Quran, but they can't. And as a result, guys, many scientists have converted to Islam. Okay? And also through the stories and the parables of the Quran, we find meaning. As Allah says in the interpretation of meaning, we relate to you, Muhammad, the best of the stories and what we have revealed to you of this Quran, although you were before it amongst those who didn't know. So Allah also, each chapter may have its own parables and its own stories that relate to whatever the topic or the theme of that chapter is. It's not out of left field. And from the stories of the Quran, many benefits come. For example, we learn about what happened with the people before us, the Jews and the Christians. We learned what happened to cause them to fall out of grace with Allah. Remember, the Jews used to be the chosen people of Allah, and they were replaced by the Christians, and then they were replaced by us. So we get to learn what mistakes these people made to cause them to no longer be the chosen people from the stories that the Quran has. And also we learn about the laws. We learn about what laws and that Allah sent to the previous prophets and nations, and how as a result of them disobeying those laws, Allah ended up making laws that were punishments for them. So we learn the consequences of rejecting Allah's message and not obeying him. And we find many reminders from these stories, of what mistakes to not make, what punishments to not bring down upon ourselves. And we also learn about the world. We see that history repeats itself. There's nothing that we're going through today that has not already been experienced from the people that came before us. And also by learning the stories and parables of the Quran, we see that as Muslim nations, we should try to hold firm to these words of Allah. And we also learn from the stories the power of Allah, that his power cannot be tamed. We learn the history of legislation. We learn the history of civilization. We learn the history of man from these stories. So again, guys, these are the miracles of the Quran. The Quran is a miracle in and of itself. And that's why I tell a lot of you sisters, be careful. When you sisters are in those Quran study classes, y'all need to be careful. When you're reading a chapter of the Quran, don't sit there and try to come up with your own meaning and understanding, because it may be wrong. And this is a grave sin. And that's why, for like Sister Amy had called me. She wanted to put together a Quran study group for the sisters that are new shahadas. Like I told her, all of you are new shahadas. You're not qualified for that. Instead, go get a book. Get a book on faith, the signs of weakness of faith, and do a study class on that. Or read about, the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and do a study class on that. But as far as trying to do a study class of the Quran, you sisters ain't qualified. You are just, in fact, it may cause you to apostate, because you may read a verse and not understand the meaning and think that that the path you were on before is better than this path. So do study circles on weakness of faith, signs of strength of faith, but leave the Quran alone. Leave that for the professional scholars, the true scholars of the Quran to do for you. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop right here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm going to log out and I'm getting ready to log back in, because it's time for Brother Mukhtar's class. He's going to be doing the story of Khalid bin Walid. This is the history of Islam. And pay attention to the names that he mentions. Okay? And what happens, because you see Islam being practiced, and they were in war times from the beginning to the end. All right. So I'll be back in about 3 minutes. Let me log out and log right back in. Look for the next tab to go live that says Khalid bin Walid. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. I'm getting ready to log out. I'll come back in, inshallah.